So we had already benefited from the discussion in the morning where a kind of a theoretical understanding was given. And secondly, we have also seen vibrant discussion about at a more aggregate level, particularly in terms of what has been termed as a LMIC. So I would concentrate on a country case study, trying to understand how this has impacted a particular country. So as has been rightly mentioned, that COVID didn't really come. What COVID did is basically expose the vulnerability of those particular. And I am taking a case which is variously understood as a test case. Somebody has said as a basket case. Somebody has said it as a development paradox. Somebody has said it as a development surprise. So this country has gone through a lot of lamentation, particularly at the international level. So narratives are in bounty, and some of the Nobel laureates have praised it like anything. So let's really look at it. And this is something we have to really talk about, because there are always certain ideas coming in terms of lamentation. Either you call it emerging economies, you call it tiger economies, you name it. So these lamentations are very good in term for Goldman Sachs. So these, having said that, so what we have seen, I would just give some examples. So before pandemic, what we have observed, and the data, there are issues with the credibility of those data. But even then, the government data would say that there is a reduction in employment and there is a reduction in rate of return if you are comparing with the rate of return to capital. So as a result, we have seen the slowing down of the rate of reduction in poverty. Simultaneously, we have seen that there is a reduction or negative growth rate in terms of manufacturing employment. We have also seen that there has been a growth in informal sector or SME sector. So these are more or less observed in Bangladesh. And obviously, what you end up having those kind of, the question is, how do we really ask ourselves that if these are the case, if it is on a sound track, then why this country cannot absorb any shock? So are we really, the way we try to understand structural change, is there any kind of a serious lacuna in terms of our understanding of structural change? Or how do we understand it? Or what would we be calling as a stability? Say, for example, Bangladesh has I would come later, $40 billion as a result, but it has already approached IMF. So when we talk about these things, how do we really talk about what are the criteria of transformability? And what that really leads to what we can call sustainability? So these are the questions I'm sure we would be asking ourselves. So as we know, these are real numbers, and these numbers is one of our studies that our colleagues have done, and this has come as a book. But this requires reformulation because of the other effects, particularly due to the rise in food prices, particularly the cost of living crisis. So what we have seen is a kind of a pauperization. And that linked to the last question, because 30 years of gradual reduction in poverty. So how does that get reversed? Or what are we talking about we used to talk about social security. Then we formulated this. ILO is a real thing, which comes up with different ideas. Now they call it social protection. NGOs jump in and they call it social protection. So what is what? Do we have that capacity? And irony in that particular case is because Lord Beveridge was born in a district in that particular country. And that is the poorest district in Bangladesh. Because Lord Beveridge was born in Lumpur district of undivided India. Yes. So you could see that this discussion about, and we are keeping on, and UNDP has recently come up with a paper where they're saying targeted cash transfer really helps. So how are we really going to talk about this universal social security? So how do we want to frame that idea? And definitely, I'm in some cases very hopeful about Sri Lanka in the sense that it has that capability, and given the right mix of the policies, it might, the recovery period might be lessened. But how about these countries where there are no social security system, and what we have is a social safety net programs, and that too are, and there is a quite agreement that this is fraught with fragmentation, because in case of Bangladesh, we have 23 department and ministries look after 99 to 114 social safety net programs. Secondly, everybody agrees there is an exclusion error, and everybody also agrees there is an inclusion error, because of the nature of the politicization at the local level in terms of securing vote for that particular political party. So how are we going to deal with it? And given that now we have a pauperization, and there we need to really talk about it and discuss about it. Second, we invented and we came up with a lot of alphabets in order to show how quick there would be a recovery. So isn't it simply like the neoclassical economics, where you think that if an agent is incentivized, then there would be possibility of a better return? Or should we be extending what our kind of an understanding that its structure that really matters, and the growth recovery process requires a deeper understanding of structure itself in order to address that? And if you really look at a global level, you can also see a correlation. Particularly, we see in case of Bangladesh that there is a frequency, because if we look at cyclone, we used to have it, say, 10, 15 years. But what we now see is like the global crisis in terms of economic crisis, the frequency has really lessened, and the crisis is haunting us. So we see a confluence of crisis coming after, say, if it would have been 25 years, now it is 5 years. And so why are we not really talking about like the way we talk about, say, for example, we talk gender discrimination, but we don't really talk that we would have to talk about, this is about patriarchy, and we want dismantling patriarchy. So isn't it time to really talk about capitalism itself and really put the elephant? Yes, this is what is causing, and this is the reason it is causing. So we need not to have a neutral sounding term in order to address that issue. So I'm sure. So what we have seen, and this would be prolonged in terms of, and by that process, we would see, because of the rate of return on capital is increasing in case of Bangladesh, and I would later discuss about the accumulation process, which is a primitive accumulation process. It's not a crony capitalism in no way. So how the primitive accumulation really takes place, and how that really extend that curves, and it is going on. So let's really, and that thesis can be also exemplified by the stimulus package. And there is a particular debate about whether we go for fiscal policy or we need a monetary policy based stimulus. Obviously, that debate I am in agreement that we need to fiscal policy. But why in countries like Bangladesh really tends to go for monetary policy led stimulus? Because there is a reason for it. And the reason is, I would never pay back the loan that I have received from the government. Because why should I be paying it? Even if I sign up to Basel III. Why? Isn't it the case? Because I have elected the government to make sure that a person owns, or a person's group own 8 to 9 banks. And that is not limited, I would rather tell you, because that name came in, how Adani is being paid from Bangladesh. So if you really look at that, all these CMSME, they are not going to get part of the stimulus, no matter how much you try to do it. So it would go to the class which is a rentier class, and they would never pay back the loan. So if you really look at the whole stimulus, that's what it suggests. And let's really look at the current situation. What we have been seeing, that we have a 40 billion reserve. Then why there is a real kind of a demand for dollar. And according to central bank, they have done an 11% depreciation. But in the curve market, it's higher. So if we have a comfortable reserve, then why should there be a crisis? So what we see is basically this can be understood in a very simpler way, the way I try to understand. So the import that is being shown hasn't been really imported into the country. The export, that income is shown, that has never really returned to the country. Then why all on a sudden right now? Because why all on a sudden right now? Because our remittance growth this time, which has always offset the money that has been parked somewhere by the people, labor, who has always been sending the remittance. But this year, we have a negative growth in remittance because export growth remained the same, import growth increased. But what we have observed, so over-invoicing and under-invoicing remains the same. So that has never created a problem until when the inflow of remittance has had a negative growth, and it's 15%. But why does that happens? And that also requires mega projects. Because how do you ensure that there is enough rent? So if you really look at Bangladesh project overrun, cost overruns, what you observe, if you need say a nuclear station power plant to have it in India would be $4.3 billion, but Bangladesh would cost $12 billion. Or let us really look at the Adani case. So Adani has signed an agreement that they would provide power to Bangladesh, but that requires a transmission line. So since there is no transmission line, so they are getting the capacity charge. So without really exporting a single amount of electricity, they would be getting the capacity charge. And that's happening And then you can't say anything because there is an indemnity by the parliament that you can procure electricity, but you can't really go to court. And government earlier decided, okay, so we would have the generation capacity, but every energy source we won't go for exploration. 20 years there were no gas exploration in Bangladesh. So the understanding was that the source would come from imported, and when it short, then we have the energy price has gone up. So the policy from the very base, from the inception, was that somebody would benefit out of this whole process, because we are not going to go for exploration. While even Myanmar is exploring in Bay of Bengal, and you know, in a delta there is a huge hydrocarbon reserve, and Bay of Bengal is one of the best delta. But for 20 years, there is no gas exploration by the government. Okay. So now you see that. And then, so what we are ending up, there is the deindustrialization and informalization. So how are we going to really reformulate this debate? Because the way deindustrialization and informal sector, the way ILO puts it, doesn't really capture, to my mind, and I would really like you all to deliberate upon. Would that be the beginning? Would be to try to understand petty commodity production and how do we really want to see it? Because otherwise, the way the informal sector is understood by ILO, gives a misunderstanding, because what we see in countries like Bangladesh, that informalization is an effect of a deindustrialization policy. So when we talk about deindustrialization, so what are the drivers and what are the causes that really lead to this country like a deindustrialization? And obviously Bangladesh has always and is dependent on a single commodity, which is RMG. And that has happened. Some people make joke about it. We have a single party, we have a single commodity, we have a single everything. So even if you look at the agriculture, it's all cereal production, because we have never been able to diversify the economy itself, let alone the competitiveness and others. So what it really allows us and exposes us to understand the political settlement of Bangladesh, where we could see an accountable resource-dependent syndicate interwoven by vertical and horizontal structure. And that has a deregulation in the sense that, yes, if you are a member of the local council, so you could decide about this amount of money. And then it moves. And quite an organized way of really looking at things. While we talk about political settlement, and then we also talk about authoritarian tendencies, but we do not see a kind of a countervailing forces in operation in country like Bangladesh. And there are many ideas about it. So including my peculiar idea about public society, which is in a statistical sense is very simple, is that normal distribution. If the power lies with the normal distribution, then, and there could be, because the state itself is always a coercive mechanism. So if there is a public society or closer to the public society, there could be a change in the frame of public policy. And that too, in no way I'm saying Shankha Gorishto, meaning majoritarian. What we am trying to suggest is a Odhikangsho, meaning maximum. So what we need to really look at, how do we look at the development question And I really would like you to comment on this, and thereby I can have a better understanding of the issues. And I look forward to benefiting from your guidance and suggestions. Thank you. Thank you.